Well, it took some doing to get it cleaned back up to this state, but as you can probably see, these dark patches here, that's pitting in the aluminium surface. That's where it had corroded away, and that's where those major Zeiss bumps were under the leatherette at the back. And that was all hiding under the adhesives and the remains of the leatherettes and everything else that was stuck on there. It's quite significant, that pitting. Certainly more than you'd expect. Here, of course, this is the casting. It's a different aluminium alloy, of course, and it doesn't corrode in the same way. So it very much depends on the metals as to how they will react to environmental problems like moisture and so forth. So that's the body casting now, pretty much clean to my satisfaction. It's taken me quite a while to get it cleaned down to that state, but it means I can move on, clean up some of the rest of the components. Well, I've got these components cleaned up fairly well, and I've discovered why it's reluctant to move. On this piece here, this projection, this rail, it's got quite a pronounced bump or dent in it right at that point. And likewise on the other side, on the top, it's got quite a pronounced dent too. So that tells me that the camera received a nasty shock when the sliding section was sitting in that position. Something has struck it. I know the camera's been dropped, but something has probably distorted this whole piece, and that has caused that rail there effectively to get a bump in it. And I don't know whether I'm going to be able to get rid of that. So what I'll try is I will take a fine file and just run it over that sharp projection and see if I can get that to change. See, it just drops back as far as that and no more. But in practice, this has to push all the way back pretty much to there when the camera's folded up, and it just doesn't want to. Well, I'm hardly ready for the final assembly, but I've got this piece sliding in smoothly now. The shroud, this piece here, is quite very soft aluminium, and this rail here and here is damaged in this piece. It actually got quite a twist on it. Something must have acted to really distort this. I really don't know what went wrong there. It's almost as if something was holding the door, holding this frame from going all the way back into the body, and the front door was forced, effectively twisting the lens standard on those two rails, so that the rail got twisted towards the back. As a result, trying to straighten it up, of course, being very soft aluminium, just sort of made you're making as much mess as you were cleaning up, really. So there's a lot of filing work's gone in there in order to get that to move smoothly. When it's in the erected position, this is held well forward, and the two buttons, top and bottom here, will latch it into position. So I'm not concerned that it's going to be loose on the front standard's going to be loose on the rails, because the rail at the front of the shroud is good. That's undamaged. It's the rail at the back of the shroud where the front lens standard goes right back into the body. That's where it's twisted. Very unusual. I can't say I've struck one quite like that before. Something really odd's happened there. It's like the front of the camera was folded up when something on one side only of this lens standard was stopping it from moving back into the body. But whatever the cause, that little problem seems to be dealt with. So it means I can carry on with the assembly. Well, having the camera body all clean and ready to go, I've got to work with these leatherettes to get rid of this incrustation of corrosion products. So I'm scraping this carefully with a scalpel blade to crack away those deposits. Now I can see a little crack in the leatherette there, so I've got to be quite careful here that I don't end up tearing the leatherette. And the cracks there, probably because the amount of stretching that was done by the growing lump underneath it has exceeded the tensile strength of the very tired fabric base for the leatherette. Leatherettes age, typically they become more brittle, less flexible. When the leatherettes were new, they would have been nice and flexible. They would have folded around the body casting easily. This is a fairly extreme example of lumps and bumps. And Zeiss bumps are somewhat easy to deal with on leather rather than leatherette. Leathers, even old leather's a bit more forgiving. Leatherette was used probably primarily as a cost saving measure and a quality control measure, since it's far more predictable in its characteristics than a natural product like leather, which is going to vary from hide to hide, whereas leatherette presumably would be held to more consistent standards in the factory. I have no idea whether the leatherette that Kodak used was a pattern deliberately designed for Kodak or by Kodak, or whether it was just one that they chose from a range offered by various manufacturers. The embossing of the name and so forth would have taken place long after the leatherette itself was manufactured. This stuff is quite brittle, so it cracks away fairly easily using the tip of my scalpel. Of course, I've done this many times, so I have a pretty fair idea how much pressure I can apply, what direction to apply the pressure, and what to watch out for. Some of those things you probably can't put into words. It just comes down to a matter of experience. That looks pretty good. I'm just giving a light general scrape now to remove any loose lumps and bumps, having got rid of the major bumps. Now looking at that leatherette, I'll hold it in the light so you can see it. There you go. So we've got Zeiss bumps all the way through here. Now the leatherette's quite stiff. They're probably not going to push down, they're not going to glue back flat, not in that state. So I have to treat that a little bit, gives that some extra care and attention. So I'll just do these two pieces from the front of the camera. And here I've got more texture. The adhesive is stuck differently to the different metal of the camera body, and here you can see quite pronounced lines on here. I'm not sure how they applied the adhesive. I'm guessing that was applied with a brush, and looking at that, it looks like it wasn't worked into the surface of that fabric, and may have sat just on the high spots. The leatherettes for the front didn't really show much problem with Zeiss bumps. The problem here was more that they were peeling away. That corner there is actually cracked, so be careful with that, that'll want to get away. But the problem here was more that they were peeling off, and there was obviously something going on underneath that surface. Here's the Zeiss bump here. I'll just see if I make sure I get rid of all of that rubbish. Okay, so next up, once I've cleared away all the dust and rubbish here, I'm going to soak this leatherette in some warm water with a little bit of dishwashing detergent. It's just something embossed, stuck there in the embossing. Let's see if I can get that out. That's better. That probably won't affect the plastic material, but it may soften the fibres of the fabric, which I presume are cotton. It may soften that up and allow a little bit more flexibility. Then I'm going to press this between two pieces of tissue with a warm iron, and hopefully the warmth will soften the plastic surface enough that these Zeiss bumps here will push back down flat, because there's no danger that I'm going to get the glue to do that, to pull that bump down flat. It's just not going to happen. Right, to the cleaning. Okay, let's get this leatherette in here soaking. If the leatherettes are unusually dirty on the outside, this can be useful just to get the dirt off the leatherette too. But primarily here the moisture will be not so much going into the plastic, which is probably impervious to moisture, or largely impervious to moisture. It'll be into the cotton fibres. No obvious sign that those bumps are having any, that there's any impression on those bumps. The water's simply not warm enough to do that. Right, well next I'm going to press that out between two pieces of tissue with a warm iron, and I warn you to be very careful, because if you overdo it, if the temperature's too high, it will melt the plastic entirely and it'll stick to the tissue, and you'll have a bugger of a job cleaning it up. So be very cautious. Start with a only slightly warm iron and work your way up until you get the result you want. Well, here we are. This has certainly stuck more to the glue side of the leatherette, which I suppose is not really surprising. But the bumps have receded quite a lot. This of course will be stretched out over the back of the camera, so let's have a look at that. I would say that that'll work quite well. Certainly the bigger Zeiss bumps appear to have gone. Of course, now I've got to get rid of this last piece of tissue that's stuck on the back here. It looks like that's going to lift off easily. And that's the remains of the adhesive have done that. That is softened with the heat and bonded nicely to the tissue paper. I'm sure if you had a Teflon sheet or something you wouldn't have to worry about things like that. Okay, well there's a crack in the leatherette at that point. That's where it was right on the curve of the body edge, and that's always where it's prone to crack. A bit of a lump of rubbish there still, see if I can deal with some of that. And there's a fragment of tissue there. Alright, I think that leatherette's good. I think that can go back on the camera at this point. And so I'll need my adhesive, and then I can glue my leatherettes back in place. This being the one that had the major problem with Zeiss bumps, and I think they're somewhat reduced now, and the rest will probably look even better on the camera. Something that's worth doing with this adhesive, because basically it's a contact adhesive, is anywhere there were Zeiss bumps, which is typically over rivets and the likes, you can, if I put some adhesive on the aluminium body, there's a good likelihood that that'll stick down better. I can be guided here by where the corrosion is, because that's where the problem was on the camera body, not necessarily over some of those rivets. That'll do. A leatherette. So it's a big piece of leatherette, so I can spread a bit out on it like that and work it in with a toothpick, making sure I get cover right to the edges. And of course I can move the excess further down the leatherette as I work. Small pieces of leatherette, you're better to apply your adhesive to a piece of paper, then transfer it to the leatherette on the toothpick so that you can apply just as much as you need, exactly where you need it. Bigger pieces like this I can be a bit more generous and use the leatherette itself as my palette. Down this corner here now I want some. I think that'll do. So bringing in the camera body and making sure it's the right way up, because you don't want your retina name upside down. See if I can get this into place. Getting it centered up on the body is, or in this case the back, is not always the easiest with a long strip like this. But that is going to do it, I'd say. They're certainly cracked at that point in the leatherette. really didn't want to fold around that corner much. And where those bumps are, I'm pressing them down with the tail of this pair of tweezers in the hope that a bit of localised pressure there will help that push down. So, well, there it is. That'll dry, it'll improve as the glue hardens and dries, it'll improve the appearance a bit. I'll run over these edges here with a bit of naphtha on a cotton bud to lift any adhesive out. It doesn't look like I've got much squeeze out to speak of there. This paint loss here, that was gone before we started. That's where it's rubbed off. But there you go, the leatherette is vastly improved. Those ice bumps are far less pronounced than they were. And probably more importantly, it wasn't the ice bumps themselves that were the problem, they were showing the problem. The problem was the corrosion underneath the leatherette, which would have continued, and it would have meant that the leatherettes eventually would have started falling off. Well, as soon as they start getting loose, what happens is typically corners come loose, they get caught on things, the leatherette's old and brittle, it snaps off, and then you've got something that looks quite ugly. While that leatherette is stuck back firmly to the surface, it is largely protected from that sort of damage. All its edges are tucked in. But I'll just continue and do these two front panels now, which should be far more simple to deal with, and we'll be done. So I'll start with this one here, and yeah, I can put some straight onto the leatherette. Now that corner's gone. Yeah, I was just looking to see if that corner was folded over, but really it's gone. It's where the leatherette would have been exactly as I'd suggested. It had been loose. It's been sticking up, it's caught on things, and it's been snapped off or worn away. And this leatherette's got a little pinhole in it because that's where that piece stuck to the body previously. That'll do. Get the leatherettes on the right way up. They've got an embossed line on them. The embossed line is towards the top of the camera, not the bottom of the camera. And get this centered up. There's a chrome trim top and bottom, and the leatherette falls between the chrome trims. They are basically the same width. So if it's centered on that body, you'll be good to go. There we go. And that's where that pinhole is there. You'll see that it's not particularly pronounced, and by the time I'm finished, it won't be visible at all. And the piece for the other side. Let's get that in place. One of these this one's got a broken corner. It's cracked at the bottom corner. Let's be careful at that. Okay, get this one in position. These leatherettes are quite stiff. That means that they want to retain the shape they're in, and if the shape that they're currently in is flat, they won't want to go around corners. If the shape they're currently in is curved, they will not want to flatten out. So we're sort of halfway between. That looks good, and that's where there was that Zeiss bump on there, which may or may not flatten out. So there's our leatherettes basically back on the camera body, which is good because it means that I can do the rest of the reassembly once I've got all the parts back from the ultrasonic cleaner, and I'm reminded that I haven't done that yet, so that's my next task. Still, we're well on the way. It'll be a success.